This episode has been brought to you in part by the Azrieli Music Prizes, celebrating 10 years of promoting excellence in music composition. Come experience the musical imaginations of AMP's 4 extraordinary 2024 laureates. The Orchestre Symphonique de Montréal Chorus and Maestro Andrew McGill give the world premiere of their prize-winning works for the AMP Gala concert on October 28th at Maison Symphonique in Montreal. Learn more at azrielifoundation.org/AMP.
Getting our first snapshot of how voters in battleground states are reacting. Jamie?
Shannon, honey, Florida Atlantic University teamed up with Mainstreet Research to poll voters in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, all of those battleground states that could determine the outcome of the presidential election.
That's the sound of a Palm Beach news station reporting on the latest polls in the run-up to the U.S. national election. In fact, if you turn on the nearest television, you'll likely find something similar. But what's interesting about that clip is that close listeners may have heard the anchor mention Mainstreet Research, one of Canada's top public opinion and market research firms. Over the past 15 years, it's earned a reputation as one of the country's most accurate forecasters of races at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. This year, the Toronto-based firm teamed up with Florida Atlantic University, FAU, to analyze their biggest race yet, the U.S. federal election, taking place next Tuesday, November 5th. One of the main people behind the collaboration is Steve Pinkus, a vice president at Mainstreet Research. It was back in 2016, while escaping the Montreal winter near Boca Raton, that he first reached out to the university to see if they'd be interested in teaming up. Fast forward to 2023, when FAU and Mainstreet officially launched the Political Communication and Public Opinion, PolCom for short, lab, merging their experience in the worlds of polling, political communication, and journalism to investigate and analyze public opinion and political trends across the United States. They're conducting their final round of national polls today, Monday, October 28th, and plan to release the results next Monday, the day before the election. Pinkus says, in 4 decades of working in politics, he's never seen a race that looks this close.
No, not like this. Not like this. But it's also, look what happened. I mean, you had a nominated candidate, an incumbent president, forced from his ticket. And then a vice president who was considered lackluster for 3.5 years is all of a sudden thrust into the media spotlight. Tremendous initial reaction to her, primarily because she just wasn't 80 years old. But eventually it's starting to wear off, and now she's having to come up with another narrative. We'll see if it works, because I don't think the polls yet reflect what she's done in the last week to 10 days.
The CJN Daily's Ellin Bessner spoke to Steve Pinkus last week about the upcoming U.S. election. I'm Zach Hoffman. I'll be keeping Ellen's seat warm for the next few days. This is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, October the 28th, 2024. Welcome to the CJN Daily, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible in part by the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granowski Gluskin Charitable Foundation.
This is an audition to be a cantor.
But I don't want to be a cantor.
I wasn't raised with any religion. You're Jewish, though.
The heartbeat of community.
I welcomed Sam into my community by first taking his foreskin and next showing him the beautiful Twister bagel.
Culturally Jewish is the only podcast covering the weird, wide world of independent Canadian Jewish art.
Listen to Culturally Jewish at the cjn.ca/culture or wherever you get your podcasts.
Steve Pinkus has been involved with Canadian national politics since the mid-1970s. The longtime Liberal Party staffer joined the nonpartisan Mainstreet Research as vice president back in 2013. While Pinkus's PolCom lab doesn't collect data on Jewish Americans specifically, other groups have. Most say that about 70% of American Jewish voters are supporting Vice President Kamala Harris, while about 25% support former President Donald Trump. Among Jewish voters who identify as Orthodox, Support for Mr. Trump is about 77%. The reputation of the polling industry as a whole has come under scrutiny in recent years. Many still remember watching the New York Times prediction needle swinging across the screen the night of the 2016 election. Forecasts for the 2020 U.S. elections were some of the least accurate in the past 40 years. One reason may be response rates to pollsters continue to plummet. The Pew Research Center said that in 1997, they had a 36% response rate to their telephone surveys. By 2018, that number was at 6%. In 2022, Nate Cohen, who runs polling at the New York Times, said their response rate is 0.4%. And the people who are responding are likely far more motivated and engaged than the representative voter. Ellin sat down with Steve Pinkus to hear what it's like in the polling trenches as the election heads into its final stretch.
And joining us now at the CJN Daily is Steve Pinkus. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
It's good to meet you as we prepare our audience and everyone to get ready for the U.S. elections. Now, our listeners should know we're speaking just in the middle of October. There's still a long way to go, 3 weeks to go before the U.S. election, so lots of things might change. But before we get into the numbers and the issues, maybe just a little intro of how your research polling company got involved in doing U.S. polling.
I spend a lot of the winters in Florida and near Boca Raton, and that's where Florida Atlantic University is located. Back in 2016, I noticed that they were doing a little bit of polling. Not a lot, but a little bit of polling. Being heavily involved in polling here in Canada, I just was interested in it. We had a lot of politicians here in Canada that were interested in what was going on, a little perplexed as to where a guy like Donald Trump was going to come up. Anyway, so I just called the university and said, listen, I'm in the neighborhood and we do polling in Canada, and we have a lot of clients that are just trying to figure out what's going on, and they would like us to explain it to them. Fast forward 8 years, we were looking over time at how to maybe collaborate on a project together, and then this political year came up, and it was just irresistible. It's so provocative. It's so interesting. It's unlike any other election year that we've seen, especially given the fallout of 2020. And the interest is, way off the charts. So we decided to collaborate together, and they've put together a political communications laboratory. They call it the Polcom Lab, and it's jointly branded as FAU and Mainstreet Research. And we're working together, and we've done a lot of polling with them. So we've got a half a dozen PhDs from their side and all our people and our experience from our side. And it became a very, very interesting collaboration.
What kind of surveys are they? People with landlines, people with cell phones, internet, clicking? How does that work?
It's evolved over the years. We used to do all random dialing and landlines back in the day when everybody had landlines. Today, we've had to build up our databases of cell phones, and we do a combination of interactive voice response. We record the questions, and people can answer. Dial 1, dial 2, dial 3, dial 4. Another way we do it, we now have added a component of texting, where we go by the cell phones. It's a lot easier to get responses, especially from young people. And we ask all kinds of questions that generate demographics, age, gender, race, always striving for the randomness and a proper distribution across demographics.
So you got involved. Our Canadian elections and polls have to measure certain things, but the American system of elections are different. So before we actually talk about the numbers and what you're looking for, how do you measure an election in the States when it has things like electoral colleges in major states?
Well, it's a challenge, to be sure. It's very, very different. But we have our friends at FAU who understand it very well. I've got 6 PhDs on our team, all in political science. They understand it very well. So the thing is, in Canada, it's riding by riding. In the States, it's state by state. Popular vote only counts for a little bit. In the States, conventional wisdom says the Democrat must win by 4 or 5% in the popular vote in order to have sufficient margins that they can carry a large enough number of states and electoral college votes, which vary state by state, right? So California has the most, Vermont, North Dakota, and those all have a minimum of 3. They have to get to 270 electoral college votes. That's because there are 538 total votes and they need an absolute majority, 270. What it really comes down to, as odd as it may sound, is basically we all know how New York is going to go. We know how California is going to go. If you win California by 1 vote or by 5 million votes, the 59 electoral votes from California, they go. It's all or nothing. Same with New York, same with Florida, same with all these states. So really, out of the 50 states, 43 of them are givens. When we're polling it, we have to see, okay, those 7 states, how are they going to go? And conventional wisdom, if you're watching the media, they're telling you could be 75,000 votes distributed across those 7 states out of a country of 350 million that are going to determine the eventual winner.
Wow. So what are the 7 states, just for people who don't know?
Sure. So the ones most often mentioned are Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And then to that, we'll add Arizona and Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia. And now as we're getting closer, it's coming down to the key 3, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
What are the issues that people are telling you are important that will be the game changers for this election? And if you watch the debates and you watch all the social
Right.
media, you see immigration, abortion rights, the health and the senility or lack of craziness and the assassinations. Like, there's a lot of stuff that may be out there, but the
Sure.
actual voters, what do they care about?
I think, and not only in the United States, we're seeing it in Canada, we've seen it in Europe. A lot of the incumbent leaders have been really socked by inflation. The impact on things like groceries, where people really live, the sticker shock has really hit home. And they go back and they look at 4 years ago under Trump, it wasn't like that. But under Biden, it is. It's not really the fault of any of the incumbents. It's just that they had to make people survive the pandemic, that 1.5 to 2 years, and they pumped all this money into the economy and inflation ensued. So now wages are trying to keep up with the cost of living, but people are unhappy because they go to their grocery stores every week and they go, oh my God, look at the cost of beef, look at the cost of eggs, look at the cost of milk, look at the cost of everything.
Okay, so they're saying affordability is a huge issue. That's the second one. Housing.
Which is the same thing.
Right. And what about immigration, which is Trump's calling card?
Immigration,
how big is that
that's
a
an
game
interesting
changer
issue.
for them?
It's interesting. You'd think that the Hispanic population, for example, would be very sympathetic to those migrants. Not really so. When you look at the demographics in the U.S., blacks tend to be a certain way. They've tended to vote Democrat. But when you look at Hispanics, there is a wide range of Hispanic populations. So Cubans are not Mexicans, are not Puerto Ricans, are not Colombians, are not Venezuelans.
So it's hard to imagine.
You can't say,
Assume.
Hispanics go in a certain direction. They don't. You look, for example, South Florida, a lot of Cubans. They have others too, but a lot of Cubans came in the 60s and 70s, some more recently, but mainly. They felt that they've earned their place in American society. They see themselves as Cubans, but Americans. And if you ask them how they feel about all this immigration, they're against it. They're going, why should these people come in and get all the benefits? I worked hard. I have a house. I put my kids to college. I make a good living. I've achieved the middle class lifestyle. I like where I am, but I worked hard to get it. Why should all these people come from across our borders and try and get the same things that I got? To say that Hispanics, you would think, they'd be in favor of all these other Hispanics coming into the country. It's not really true.
So you guys have been polling since when for the U.S. national elections and state polls?
We've done some states too. We got seriously into it for this election cycle probably in January.
Okay. We're talking in mid-October.
Yeah.
The latest polls your company has show Kamala Harris with a 55% probability of winning.
Yeah,
it's very close to a toss-up.
Yes.
Why is it a toss-up? Why is it so close?
It's
Where
so
do you
close because, as I said, 43 of the states, the outcomes are given. And it's those 7 states, and really those 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, that it seems to be always sort of devolving to those 3 states. You know, the big fight in 2020 was Trump yelling at the people in Georgia saying, find me 11,000 votes. He lost Georgia by 11,000 votes. Some of the states were closer. So when we look at Pennsylvania, as of today, it's 0.7% lead for Harris. If we look at Michigan, 0.7% for Harris, and Wisconsin, 0.5%.
Wow.
Harris had a lead 3-4 weeks ago, substantially more than that. Substantially meaning she was up 2.5 points, sometimes more, depending on the state. And now the race has narrowed significantly.
In Canada, you usually know within a couple of hours who's won.
Yeah.
The same day the polls close. Is that the case in this coming election in the United States? How long will it take, do you think? And then there's the whole other factor of if they will capitulate.
It's 50 separate elections. Each state is run autonomously. They have a whole election apparatus. And so the rules are different for every state. So if you look at California, they close later, but on the other hand, it's a runaway win usually for Democrats. But when you get into they may not know the results in Pennsylvania for a couple days.
Do any of the convictions that Trump has had in the courts, his tax evasion, his January 6th, his impeachments, anyone care about that now in the election? What are you hearing?
They care. I would say this, given what we talked about in terms of inflation, cost of housing, immigration, if anybody else was running for the Republicans, they'd probably be winning by a much more comfortable margin. Trump is so off the wall and he's saying such crazy things that a lot of people are reticent to vote for him because they worry, and they worry about January 6th, and they worry about a lot of other things. And yet he's still that close. And that's because of the antipathy, not to Harris necessarily, but to the incumbency, and things are just tougher. I've heard it so many times. I know he's crazy. I know he's this. I know he's that. I won't use the words they're using. They know. But not everybody's a sophisticated economist where they connect the dots between the money that was pumped in to support people during the pandemic and the inflation that it caused. When you add that famous question in politics, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? Most people think they're not.
Except that anyway, we won't go there. I mean, he's lying about a lot of things. He talks about crime being up. It's not. And he talks about that he was the best president they ever had. No. And COVID and all these crazy wacko theories. Yeah. And nobody seems to care.
There's a lot of things being said and done in this election that would kill any other candidate, and Trump is rising above it. If it was DeSantis or Nikki Haley or a couple of other Republicans running instead of Trump, they'd be way ahead. Because of the economics, because of the inflation, because of housing, because of immigration, those issues would resonate a lot more.
We are the Canadian Jewish News, of course, and we want to know whether the Israel war, Israel-Gaza, Israel-Palestine, is it all a factor in this coming election for them? Because
it's
Trump
a factor
said,
in Michigan.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. But Trump said to the U.S. Jews, if you vote for the Democrats, then you're traitors. And so for us, it's a big deal. But how is the Jewish question and the Israel question polling in your results so far?
Well, we haven't specifically polled Jewish voters in the U.S., but the one state where the Arab vote is a big factor is Michigan. So it'll be interesting to watch that. There's not the Trump campaign directly, but one of their political action committees, their PACs, are running ads in Michigan, in Dearborn and in Arab areas of Michigan, going, Doug Emhoff is Jewish, and therefore Kamala Harris is going to be more favorably disposed to Israel and to the Jewish vote. And you think, okay.
So that would be against the Democrats because that would be against the Republicans because they're for Israel and pro-Israel. No,
well, but they're running it in the Arab neighborhoods to upset the Arabs.
But Trump is more pro-Israel than she is.
That's the perception.
No, it's true. I mean,
okay, fine.
He's better friend to Netanyahu than
yes,
Biden.
That's true. He is certainly more friendly to Netanyahu They asked her directly, is Netanyahu an ally? And she said, Israel's an ally. It's very different from what's going on here in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Are you seeing from your polling a general trend towards away from, and we call it wokeism, or they're calling it that, DEI and wokeism in the States? People want to go back to things the way things were, quote unquote. They're not happy with all this democratic values and progressive values.
You got a lot of whites who yearn for the days where they were really in control. They miss the days when they were the dominant political force, which in the 60s, 70s, 80s, that was the case. Not so much anymore, because now if you take the aggregate of all the minorities, they outnumber the whites. Now, they're not monolithic, but there's that. And Trump speaks very much to them. People scratch their heads and go, why? He's only playing to his base. And then he talks to the middle-class black voter who's having trouble making ends meet, or the young people. Young people are going for Trump in a far greater numbers. Why? They can't buy their homes. They want to buy their homes. They remember 4 years ago they could. Now they can't. Inflation's gotten away from them. Yeah, the market's doing well. The job market is doing well. But for the average white working class guy who's 30, 35 is right around the time when he should be owning his own home. And this is out of reach for them. And that's a big, big factor in what we're seeing.
So is there anything else our listeners should know about what's going to happen in the run-up to the next few weeks that we should be watching out for?
Okay, so there are two issues that I wanted to raise with you. One is the black vote. Why is Kamala Harris at this stage of the game fighting so hard and having to fight so hard? Our latest numbers have roughly 80% of blacks will vote for the Democrats, 13 to 15% for Trump. However, if we go back to 2020 and 2016, the blacks were voting by about 93% for the Democrats. So even though they've got a huge margin, it's substantially down from where they were 4 years ago. But if you've got a lot of black voters in an area like Philadelphia or Pittsburgh, okay, they could help offset a lot of the white voters who are more pro-Trump in the rest of the state. So every one of those black votes counts. Black men, black women. That's why she's fighting so hard. It's to get them back from 80 to 93. The other demographic that's really key is the non-college educated white voters. And right now, our latest numbers had her, she was at 37.5 and he's at 57.5. Conversely, under college educated voters, Harris has 54% and he's at like 41. From what my analysts are telling me, if he can go and grab another 2-3% of those white non-college educated votes, that could flip a lot of states. That's a very, very key thing to watch as we come down to the last 3 weeks.
So you think those three states, so Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, it's too close to call, or so far it's Trump for Michigan?
No, we're showing, and 538 today has her leading by less than 1% in each of those states. That's too close to call.
Oh my God.
And so when it's that close, it's not going to take a lot to flip the one way or the other. Another issue that we should talk about is the Senate.
Right, and Congress Senate, who's going to control, right?
Well, who's going to control, but the Senate is very important. First of all, it looks like the Republicans are going to win the Senate. They're going to take West Virginia. They're going to take Montana. There's two gone for the Democrats, and right now it's 51-49. That'll take it the other way, and then there are a couple more in play. And if that happens and Trump wins, now you've got two out of these of the very conservative Supreme Court justices that are kind of nearing their age of retirement. I think you might see a scenario whereby Alito and Thomas might retire. They're getting close to that age, and allow Trump to put in two more young Supreme Court justices of that ilk. And that would mean they would control the Supreme Court, irrespective of what happens all the elections, at least through the 28 election cycle, and maybe even beyond that, because it'll be very tough if we look at the Senate seats that come up again in 24 and 26. be very hard for the Democrats to retake it based on the seats that are up for grabs in 2 years and even in 4 years. And that's something definitely worth considering.
Okay. Well, we're going to have you back closer to, as you're still doing. How many more polls are you going to do? Or you're running them continuously?
The biggest flurry is going to be on the 28th of this month, where we're going to have a national. We're going to have a Florida poll because of our FAU partners. And then that final week, we're going to be doing the big three: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and releasing them the day before the election.
How's Florida going to go? We have a lot of snowbirds in Florida.
Yeah, but they don't vote.
I'm just saying, but they're very, very pro-Trump. In Florida, the Jewish voters in Florida
the Jewish
are pro-Trump.
Is pro-Trump. They're a mix of moderate Republicans and more ardent Republicans, to be sure. He's got about a 5-6% lead, and that's more than enough to carry the state. The Cubans in Miami, much stronger Republicans than, for example, the Puerto Ricans in Orlando, or some of the other Hispanic groups in other parts of the state.
It's fascinating. As a Canadian watching this, I mean, you've been doing BC polls, you're doing all kinds of polls. Have you ever seen an election this close?
No, not like this. But it's also, we've seen so many radical twists and turns. You know, I mean, look what happened. I mean, you had a nominated candidate, an incumbent president, forced from his ticket. And then a vice president who was considered lackluster for 3.5 years is all of a sudden thrust into the media spotlight. Tremendous initial reaction to her, primarily because she just wasn't 80 years old. People were just so relieved to see anybody but Trump or Biden. But eventually it kind of starting to wear off, and now she's having to come up with another narrative. She didn't want to do a lot of media up until the last week. Now all of a sudden we're seeing her everywhere. We'll see if it works. On the other hand, you have Trump saying crazy things, talking about Hannibal Lecter and all kind of other nonsense.
Thank you so much for these insights. And our listeners can log on, of course, and sign up for your newsletter, Mainstreet Research, right? And they can get your regular updates. And we'll be back. Thanks again for being on the CJN Daily.
Great pleasure.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part by the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky Gluskin Charitable Foundation. The Daily is produced by me, Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.